Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Chicken Movies, the channel that talks about movies. But for once, I'm actually about to talk about a movie from one of the best movie directors working today, Christopher Nolan, and more specifically, a film of his that I feel is often overlooked. That film being Tenet. Releasing in 2020, Tenet was Nolan's 11th film, and being 2020 for obvious reasons, not a lot of people were able to see this film in cinemas. Or at all, for a matter of fact. I, however, was one of them, and I had mixed opinions in honesty, which I'll go into more in depth later. And I wasn't the only one. Many people have mixed opinions on Tenet, with next to nobody rating it as one of Nolan's best. Some love it, some hate it, and few understand it, which is where I come in. I liked this movie enough upon first viewing that I knew I had to see it a second time, and then a third, and then a fourth. We're going to take a look at each viewing in order to better decode the strengths and weaknesses of the film, and why I think it's often overlooked. As a side note, in an early draft of the video I thought it would be funny to skip around the order of viewings, where I'd start with second viewing and then do my first viewing last, but I think that would be needlessly convoluted, kind of like the movie at points. So instead, I'm following my experiences linearly, starting with my first ever viewing in cinemas. Aside from the euphoria of returning to the cinema after a pandemic, this experience was still a very exciting one. Christopher Nolan is a masterful director, and he had a clear vision that is partially Bond-inspired, partially his own brainchild, and his vision is very well and consistently shown across the film. The cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema was pretty great. I like the camera work a lot, and the use of colour, whilst not necessarily striking, still fits the aesthetic. Although this is not his best work by any means, it's still very good. I love the score of the film by Ludwig Göransson, whose work is able to blend real sounds from the film and use reversed audio really effectively alongside regular score to create music that feels so unique and fitting to this film, which I still occasionally listen to. It's a fantastic soundtrack that gives such a strong identity to this film. From a technical aspect, I really enjoyed the film and left with a positive experience. However, there was a certain level of confusion associated with the story, which I think is expected. The pacing seemed kind of uneven at points, with the first act feeling very confusing as to where it was trying to go, but once the plot properly started, I found myself enjoying the film a lot more. All of a sudden, the plot was actually moving, and there seemed to be an interesting mystery, and there were at least enough big action sequences to stop me from asking too many questions. I will say that some minor parts of the plot were not properly communicated or poorly emphasized, but it was still okay to follow, if you don't think too hard about it. Which, for the most part, I didn't. Instead, I was distracted by the main concept of this film, and I think the idea of time inversion is genius. This kind of an idea is one that I've never really seen explored in fiction before, and the way they use inversion to create exciting set pieces and to move the plot around in interesting ways is very, very inventive. I think the way it's integrated into the plot feels very natural in motivating the story and the characters, and the way they visually display these inverted objects or people was really interesting, and I'm glad to say it didn't rely too heavily on CGI. As a whole, the effects felt really authentic, and you tell a lot of effort went into the practicality and these small details of how these high concept sequences would look. Unfortunately, them explaining all of this stuff isn't very inventive. The protagonist is just wheeled into a room and told some stuff, and these scenes are okay, but info dumping like this all at once so early hurt the pacing of the film quite a bit. I very much liked the reveal at the end of the film of the protagonist being this puppet master who founded Tenet, as before that the protagonist, who whilst a charming presence, didn't have a huge amount of depth, nor did he have a particularly well-formed arc. So that plot twist was very appreciated. However, to compensate, the arc involving Kat was very engaging. I think Elizabeth Debicki is great in this movie, as was Kenneth Branagh as the villain, and their complex relationship was very well explored, with it culminating in a very satisfying ending for Kat's character, and a very complete feeling character arc. Overall, I really enjoyed my first viewing. I briefly spoke about Tenet in my best and worst of 2020 video, so go and check that one out if you want more detail on my first viewing. But to give a summary, I think it's a very technically impressive film that felt like a massive puzzle box that I'd only just started to solve. It had its problems, but I was willing to overlook those problems in search of answers. I should probably add that from this point onwards I'm going to be spoiling Tenet very heavily, so go watch the movie, it's great, and then come back and watch this video. Consider yourselves warned. This viewing, I focused a lot more on the story and trying to make sense of it all, and well, I actually did this time. I think it's really cool that the film's timeline is ordered like the letters in the word Tenet, where the beginning and end sequences of the film happen basically at the same time, the furthest moment ahead chronologically is the middle of the film, and with the context of my first viewing, the narrative felt much easier to follow. Unfortunately, because of this, the poor pacing of the first act stuck out even worse this time, and it's just not a great indication of what Acts 2 and 3 are, and despite some good character moments, this first act just felt very dry of story and creativity. This is of course made up for in bucket loads beyond the crashing plane sequence, which is where things really click into gear. I only wish that these gear changes were a little less clunky early on. Similarly, since I was trying to follow as much of the plot as possible, I found some of the lines to be a little bit awkward with how they give off exposition and why they're doing it. But on the flip side, I noticed a few quick one-liners that were pretty funny and broke up the seriousness nicely. I also found myself appreciating Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, a lot more on the second viewing. He gives a charming performance, and seeing how his arc pieced together with several little clues about his past, it made for a surprisingly sad send-off, but one that felt earned and almost heartwarming. Seeing how their friendship will begin and end across the story of the film was very satisfying. I'm not a fan of the theory that Max, who is Kat's son, is a younger version of Neil, kinda just because it ruins the sincerity of Neil's sacrifice. And if the protagonist essentially raised Neil for him to die later on in life, it just doesn't quite fit the relationship that they're hinted to have in the film. Maybe an older puppet master protagonist would do this, but that's not really what the film's about, so I choose to ignore this theory. Upon a second watch, I was able to enjoy the deeper ideas about the timelines being fixed and the implications of inversion, and the way they slowly drip feed you info about Tenet is really interesting. Being able to see how the plot unfolded in a very intriguing but logical direction made this film a lot more interesting upon second watch. At first I thought the algorithm was kind of dumb and it does pop up from nowhere, but in retrospect the mystery surrounding it and Tenet and Sator is very intentional, and now understanding what the movie was about a lot better, it worried me less. Now, one issue I do have to concede is that I rewatched this film at home on a regular TV and a regular sound system, and I really noticed issues with the sound mixing. Sound mixing is a common criticism of Nolan's films, and I really noticed it when watching using a home setup as opposed to a theatrical one. At times, characters can't be heard because their dialogue is being drowned out by the score, which is still awesome by the way, and other times characters will be talking weirdly loudly in loud environments, but we can still hear fine. I think it's largely a byproduct of the pandemic era, but this sound mixing is very off-putting, which is a shame, because the sound design itself is actually pretty good, and of course the soundtrack is still great. So after 2 viewings, I had a very rounded idea of my opinions on the film and of the story as a whole. However, something just kept drawing me in. Something that really stuck with me and made me want to dig even deeper. Now that I was fully invested in the film and its filmmaking, I started analysing the film on a deeper level. I started watching fan theories, breakdowns, and even some pretty cool renders of the inverted sequences. This time round, I noticed a lot of really cool details that add to continuity or a nice callback / call forwards to events earlier or later on in the film. Just little things like the protagonist seeing the windmill he lived in for a bit at the start of the film when he's on his ship, the ambulance with Neil and the protagonist driving past Neil and the protagonist during the plane crash sequence, and Kat's future self inspiring her past self. All of these are such nice details that made this viewing way more rewarding as a fan of Tenet. Now, I was ready to let out my inner YouTuber and start nitpicking and trying to create a master plan of how everything fits together, but I'm sorry to say that I don't believe the vast majority of the fan theories. Boring, I know, but I don't believe that Neil is Max, I don't think that Fleur Delacour invents inversion, and I certainly don't feel like the whole film is just a fever dream caused by the cyanide pill that the now dead protagonist swallowed at the start. No, this film is a mystery box, but it's made by design. I believe that it was Christopher Nolan's intention to make Tenet, Sator, the algorithm, and inversion as vague as possible to surround the future in mystery. The main question of the film relates to time travel and whether a timeline is fixed or can be altered. My view personally is that the future is fixed because these alterations have already happened. See the bootstrap paradox, kind of, where the influence of the future has already been set and is objective. Therefore, the events of this film are destined to happen, and they motivate the events in the future to then go back and cause everything to happen. It's circular, I know, but I think that's the general point of it. It's objective, and the events of the film are destiny. Not necessarily because time is what's balancing things out, but because Tenet balances Sator out. All of the other mystery and intrigue surrounding the future then becomes a little more straightforward. The future is out of the character's control at the start of the film, hence we as an audience don't know much about it. However, as the characters like Neil, Kat, and of course the protagonist begin to take control of their own destinies and their own futures, we gradually learn more about the future of this universe. I like how open-ended the film is, and I'd love some kind of a sequel or spin-off set in this world. It's just such a unique style and concept of a story with so much potential for expansion that I'd love to see uncovered. Sadly, however, I don't think we'll see another installment in the Tenet universe, but I can dream. With that, I can safely say that I love this movie, so as a victory lap, I watched it a fourth and final time. For now, I'm sure I'll see it again soon. So this time round, I didn't really gain any new perspectives, it more just reinforced my opinions on Tenet. I love this movie, and I say that with no shame. However, there are several problems with the film. Several liberties made by Nolan and the crew that don't quite sit with me. Of course, there's the structural, story, and technical issues I've relayed already, but those aren't the liberties I'm talking about. I believe that Nolan was largely interested in the concepts and the themes of this film more so than his characters, and it shows. I like the dialogue, I like the arcs and the performances, but there is a certain feeling like Christopher Nolan skipped over a lot of the characterization in favour of the world and concept building. After all, the main character of the film literally doesn't have a name, and he spends a lot of the film wandering around being told things. This is a self-insert character for the audience really, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the bare-bones approach that Nolan has to its characters is what alienates certain audience members. Not me though, luckily I can look past that and focus on the story's twists and turns, the amazing action set pieces and the intriguing ideas relating to inversion. But it is hollow to some extent. This film is very much an experiment from Christopher Nolan, where he thought, what if? And he took some risks, he took some liberties, he took some inspiration from multiple places, and created a new film that felt wholly original. And subsequently he was given the treatment that creativity gets you at the box office. It's a shame because whether you're watching this film for its technical aspects, its story, or its thematic elements, there's a lot to like about this film, and it's clear that everyone involved was putting 110% into making it. The problem is, several of the creative choices made by Nolan make this film difficult to follow. However, once you put that aside, this film becomes fascinating. Which is why that I feel that Tenet is very unappreciated and is Nolan's hidden gem. Thank you everyone for watching. Do you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts on Tenet? Let me know in those comments down below. And I want to apologise for taking so long to make this video. The Game of Thrones one took a long time to make, and now my next big one is proving to be a lot of work too. The plus side is I've had a really fun time making it, and it's a video that I've teased before and have been planning on making for ages, so look for it around the end of this month. For now, however, thanks everyone for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.